Today I'm going to be doing a quick demo on how to create a Java application to connect to a PostgreSQL database. So this is going to be done in a couple of parts. One, I'm going to show how to create a PostgreSQL database within AWS RDS, and then I'll do a couple of Java demos with some code samples to connect to it. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay guys, let's go ahead and create a Postgres database over here in Amazon. So click on this DB instances and let's go ahead and create database. So let's go ahead and click on that. And for here we're going to go ahead and just create a PostgreSQL database, and we're going to be using the Amazon free tier. So let's go ahead and select that. And let's go ahead and set some of these options as you'll see here in a moment. We'll leave this DB instance identifier as just database-1. And here for the master password, we're going to be setting the password up for the Postgres user. As you can see above, the master username is Postgres. We'll leave these items as is, and we'll deselect a few things just because they're not needed for this demo. We're going to set the public access to be yes. And for availability zone, go ahead and pick the one that you just prefer. And in this additional configuration, we're going to actually create a database name within this RDS instance, and we're just going to call it demo1. And we'll deselect a few other things because they're just really not needed for this demo. And I think we're ready to go ahead and just click on create database here at the bottom. So let's go ahead and do that. And now you can see that the status of this is that it's being created. So we'll just have to wait until it's actually finished. Okay, now we can see that the status is available, so the database has already been created and can now be accessed by us and used by us as we need to. Now that it's available, one thing to note is in the security section, you'll see that there's the endpoint for the database and the port, and these two things are very important because this is what we'll need to actually connect to the Postgres database from our own machines. Okay, so now we're going to try to connect to it. So if you go ahead, we need to actually install PSQL command line, and you can do so by doing this command here, sudo apt-get install PostgreSQL client, and then let it just do its thing and complete. Okay, just finished, and let's do a test PSQL command, and you can see that it fails because by default it's going to try to connect to your local host, and we don't have anything running locally. So now let's try to connect to the PostgreSQL endpoint that we have in AWS, and we're going to try to connect as Postgres. It prompts for our password, which we'll enter, and you can see we're successfully connected. And here are the list of databases within the actual RDS instance that we have. And you can see demo1 is created just like we did in the setup for the page. Additionally, we can update this command to specify the database we want to connect to. So we can go straight to demo1 by adding the -d flag and then the table name or the database name. And we are now successfully logged in. And if you go to the RDS instance webpage, you can see that the number of connections is 1. That is basically us right now with our PSQL command connection. Okay, we're now ready to create a Java application to test and create a connection to the Postgres database. So in NetBeans, go ahead and click on New Project and select New Java Application. And let's go ahead and give it this, project name here, Example DB Connection. Go to the POM XML, at which point we're going to need to add a dependency to the PostgreSQL driver. So if we go online and go to mavenrepository.com and search for PostgreSQL, one of the options there, which I already clicked on, is this PostgreSQL database GDBC driver 42.35. If you click on it, you'll see that there is a set of line text that you can copy from Maven, which is the project that I have. So if you copy that, and if you go back to the actual NetBeans project, we can go ahead and paste that into the POM XML. So before we do that, let's go ahead and add these dependencies tags, the open and closing tags. Then we can paste the driver from the Maven repository website, and now we should have the driver once we compile. Okay, compiled fine. So let's go ahead and create some code now to actually connect to the PostgreSQL database. And to do so, you're going to need these three imports, which you're going to see right now. Therefore, creating a connection for using the driver manager and an actual SQL connection, or should I say SQL exception, that we're going to be forced to handle whenever we try to get a connection to the database. So just copy as you see. Let's go ahead and get rid of that hello world print line statement, and let's create three variables which are going to be all strings. One of them is going to be the URL, which is basically the database endpoint, and then the username and password, which we need to actually connect to the Postgres database. And basically the format for the URL is going to take this form here, JDBC : I did a typo there with the /, PostgreSQL : // and then we're going to put the database endpoint with the colon and the port number and then the database that we're actually going to be connecting to. So we can go ahead and set up the first part over here. And this is a Postgres database, so the master user by default is Postgres user. But I will create a connection object which will be defaulted to null. And here we're going to go ahead and actually get a connection to the database by using the driver manager and the get connection method, where we're going to pass these three variables, the URL endpoint, the username, and password, which we're going to be forced to actually surround this within a try catch. And we can leave this as is for now. So after this connection object is returned, we're just going to print out a statement saying that we successfully connected. And basically, this is the only thing that we're going to do in this particular code over here. But we are going to add a finally block, which in this case we're going to just close out of the connection. I'll do another bit later where we do some more with an actual connection, but just for this purpose we're going to just create a connection and then close the connection. So when we call the close method, we are being forced to wrap this within a try catch, and things look good. So let's go ahead and compile, do a clean and build, and you can see it's successful, and we should be able to run this pretty soon. Okay, now let's put a breakpoint here and debug the application. You're going to see it's going to hit this line here, connection equals driver manager dot get connection. And then if we hit F8 to step through it, you're going to see that we're going to hit the next line, which indicates that we did successfully get a connection. At which point, when I step through, it's going to go to the finally block where we just go ahead and close out the connection. For informational purposes only, I'm going to go ahead and comment out this POM XML dependency to the PostgreSQL driver that we got from the Maven repository. And we're going to do a clean and build, which you're going to see that it's going to be successful in cleaning and building. But it's going to be interesting once you run it. So if you go ahead and do debug again, we're going to get to this line item we're going to see we got into the catch block, and if we print the log statement, you're going to see that no suitable driver was found for this. And this is again because we need that PostgreSQL driver that we defined in our POM XML. So without that in your POM file, this code will not connect to the Postgres endpoint. So let's go ahead and uncomment this, and all will be good with this. Okay, here I created some more code. I'm not going to show you how I do it from scratch, but I will go over the code over here, and I will copy and paste this into the comments in the video below. But I do have a basic GUI application here that's going to create a Postgres connection and actually have user interaction where we can type SQL commands as if we were actually on the Postgres command line interface, but we're going to be doing it through our Java application, and we're going to submit those commands to the Postgres database, and we're going to display the database response. So if we go here to this example DB connection, you're going to see that the main method essentially just has this print statement saying starting, and we're initializing a database SQL interface class and starting, or should I say calling a method called start GUI. Everything else is commented out below. You don't need to worry about that. So if we go into this class here with the GUI, this is inheriting from a JFrame. So if we go to the design page, you can see over here that we actually have a few GUI objects here. We have a label SQL box, and this text area is going to be where we enter SQL commands that we're going to send to the database to execute. And then we also have another field over here, or I should say we have the submit button here, which is going to take that SQL box command and we're going to send it to the database to execute. And the database response is going to be returned to the SQL return text field. And we have a close connection button, which is essentially just going to close the database connection that we have from our code to the database itself. So if we go back into this DB-SQL interface class, you're going to see here that we have another private variable for another class, which we're going to get to in a moment, DB interface. That class essentially has the code to connect to the database, and it will actually be the place where the code gets invoked to submit the user command from the GUI and have that submitted to the database to be handled. So you can see this constructor is just calling init component, which if you expand this plus sign here is essentially all the code required that is automatically created when you design the GUI page, which I showed you before, which is those two labels, the two text areas or the text fields, and the submit and close connection. Here we have the submit SQL event button, or I should say method, and you can see here we are passing basically what's in the SQL box text field, and it's going to be getting over here, and we're going to pass that text field text into this db init submit SQL method. So once we get a response back from that, we're going to be basically displaying the output of the database response to the user by basically displaying it in the second text field, which has the label SQL return. So you can see whether we get a result set or just another object, we're going to just display it here. And we have a close button event, and essentially we're just going to call the disconnect method on the database instance. And then we have the start GUI, which is being called from the main class, which is going to just launch the JFrame GUI application that you're going to see in a moment. And the rest is just private variables for the GUI design there. So now if we go to the DB interface class, you're going to see the code that is required to connect to the database. You'll see we have a connection variable which is defaulted to null. We have a DB creds class. There are just three strings. One is a URL, which contains a string endpoint to your database. The second one is the username you use to connect to the database. And the third field is basically a password string, which is just a password to connect to the database. So I won't be showing that class, but you'll see how we're going to use those variables in a bit. So here we have the connect method where we're going to actually create a connection to the database, and you can see that I'm passing in the endpoint username password from that credentials class, and just like before, I'm just printing out a string statement saying that we're connected and just setting a boolean to indicate if we're connected or not. Down here below we have the actual submit SQL method, and here's where the actual command is going to be sent to the database to basically do. And if we go to the GUI class, you're going to see how we're invoking this submit SQL method in the submit SQL event, which is basically the user action on clicking on that submit button. And we're passing the text fields get text, which is the string command that the user is going to enter. And we have a couple of variables here and a connection where we just double check if it's null, and if so, we're going to call the connect method, which is going to get a connection to the database. And then here we have a set of if-else ifs where it's going to basically just do a check to see if the command is an insert, update, delete, or select. The code to actually execute the SQL commands is almost all the same. The difference is in a few of them is essentially the type of command that's going to be executed. Some of them are going to return a result set, some of them are going to return a boolean value, some of them are going to return an integer. So depending on the command that you do, whether it's an insert, update, select, or I forget the other one, insert, then I have these in different if-else statements, and the object returned is going to be a different data type. So that's why you see them basically as this. And you can see here in the disconnect method, we're just essentially closing out the connection and nulling the variable. Go to the PSQL command line interface, and we're going to log in. And before we do any running of the application, we don't have any tables in here yet, so nothing we can do, at least with our code setup right now, is going to actually be able to work without a table existing. So what we're going to do now is actually create a table, and I do have here commented out in one of these Java files here basically a sample command that you can do, this create table SQL command, and I'm going to update the name here just to be user table. And this is going to create a table called user table, and it's going to have a user ID field, a first name field, a last name field, and an email field. So let's go ahead and copy this, and in the PSQL command line interface we're going to go ahead and paste it and hit enter. And you can see that it says a table was created, and doing the /DT, you do see the table actually being listed there. And if we do a select star from user table, you'll see that there's nothing there. And that should be right because we just created a table. We didn't actually put any information in there yet. Okay, now let's go ahead and do a walkthrough. And I'm going to do a clean and build. And I'm going to set up breakpoints here so we can actually see what the code is doing when the user is interacting with the application. Okay, so let's go ahead and do debug. You'll see the text field or the GUIs come up, which is great. So we're going to go ahead and actually first do an insert command because we don't have any information in tables to extract or modify. So let's go ahead and do this insert into user table, and we're going to specify the columns that we're going to update: first name, last name, email, and then the actual values. And we're going to go ahead and put this fictional character from an anime that I like, Attack on Titan. So I'm just going to put him here just because I'm a fan of the show, and select submit. So now we're going to see that it actually hits this breakpoint here, the submit SQL event, and we're going to step into this method, the DB interface submit SQL method. And you're going to see it's going to come to this method here in this class, and you see that the passed in parameter has the SQL statement that we entered in the GUI. So if we just continue to step through, you see that we're going to call this connect method because the connection is null, and you're going to see here it's going to actually create a connection and return true. So let's step out of that, and now it's going to go to this if-else chain, and it's going to see that we're trying to do an insert command. So now it's going to come in here, create a statement, and then we're going to do an execute with the SQL statement that was passed in, and that's going to return a value to the boolean stat command. And if we just step through, you'll see that it actually didn't get inside the exception, which means it was successful. And then you'll see that it's returning this object, which is not a result set, so it's going to go to this else block, and it returned a value of false. So if we go to the Java documentation for execute here on the website, you can come over here and see that just because it said false doesn't mean that it wasn't successful. If you look at the return section here, it says true if the first result set is a result set object, false if it is an update count or if there are no results. So we're doing an insert command which are no results, so it's going to return a false, which is what we see here in the SQL return text field. So this is looking good. Now we're going to go ahead and create another insert, or do another insert, and we're going to do Edward Elric, and you're going to see the email here. Again, another fictional character from an anime I like, Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. So just as a fan, it's my way, just keeping them in things that I do. And we're going to go ahead and just click insert again, and forgot to push F7, so I didn't step into the that other class, but I did an F8 instead, which goes over here. And you'll see that again a false is returned, but that is okay. So now if we do a select statement from user table and hit submit, let's do F7 this time, you're going to see that it's going to go into the if block where we're doing a select. So here we go. It's going to be almost exactly as the insert, but we're getting a result set object back, and we're doing the execute query command instead of just execute. So this returns a result set back, and then in this class here we're basically casting the object returned, and then we're going to be extracting the data into a string, and then we're going to basically update that return text area with the string that we put together here. So this is going to get all the rows within the user table. And you can see that actually being displayed here in the SQL return text area. You'll see Aaron Yeager, Edward Elric, and so far things are looking good. So now let's test another command here, and let's do an update user. So we're going to update the user table, and we're going to set the first name to Alphonse, where the first name equals Edward. So we're basically replacing the first name of one of these rows to be another first name. So if we just go through this, you're going to see that it hits the update if block, and this is going to return an integer value, and this is not doing an execute query or execute, this is doing an execute update, as you can see. And this is going to return a number of rows that was affected by this update. And since we only updated one row, or I should say the update SQL that we did only affected one row, we will get a rows updated value of 1. And you can see that they're going to hover over the variable, and that's going to be what's displayed to the user in that text field that we're going to see right now. So you'll see that text field display 1, which is great. So let's go ahead and do a select star again, just so we can see. And we're not going to do a debug through this because we saw what a select does. And you can see here that Edward is no longer there. We have Alphonse because of the update. So now let's do a delete, and we're going to do this delete from user table where we're specifying the condition of which thing we want to delete. where first name equals Aaron, and then if we do submit, we're going to debug through this one. So hit F7 to get into that method, and we're going to see that it's going to go into the delete if block. And again, the delete was going to return a number of rows that were affected by the delete. So in this case, only one row would match the condition that we did. So it should return a value of 1. Which it does. And that's what's going to be displayed in the text field here. And we're going to see that here, which is perfect. Okay, let's check with the breakpoints. Let's just do a couple of other, SQL commands, stuff you already saw already. But if we do the select, you'll now see that only Alphonse is there, not Aaron Yeager, because we did the delete command on that line item. So let's go ahead and test the disconnect. If we close connection, we're going to hit this disconnect method, which closes out the connection and nulls the value, which is, again, working so far so good. The good thing is, if we create another SQL command and submit it, then we're going to hit the code where it actually checks to see if the connection is null, and if so, it's going to create a new connection. So closing the connection and nulling it out doesn't break the application if you want to do subsequent SQL commands. So if we go over here, and let's go ahead and insert another value, and we're going to go ahead and just insert to the one that we deleted. So we're going to add Aaron back into the table. And let's go ahead and hit submit. Okay, the SQL return was false from the database, which is fine like we saw before. Typing into the wrong field. And let's do one last SQL statement where we just grab everything from the user table. And you'll see that Aaron is back in there, and we have Alphonse as the first line item. And that's it. So let's go ahead and close the connection and just stop the application. And that is that.